The city was alive, but not for everyone. Bright lights flickered across restaurant windows and neon signs hummed against the night sky, while the smell of roasted meats, buttery bread, and sweet desserts spilled from warm, crowded dining rooms into the cold streets. Inside, people laughed over glasses of wine and clinked forks against plates. Outside, where the shadows lingered, the story was very different. That night, a man named Marcus wandered the streets. He was a black man in his early 40s, though life had aged him far beyond his years. His skin, a deep brown tone, was weathered and marked by hardship. His beard was untrimmed, salt and pepper in color, and his eyes, though tired, carried a sharpness that refused to fade. He wore a worn-out hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers with soles nearly torn through. His hands were calloused, and he carried a small, dirty backpack slung over one shoulder, his only possession. Marcus was homeless. The city knew him only as one of the many who drifted from corner to corner, sometimes holding a cardboard sign, sometimes asking quietly for change, sometimes simply walking. Most people passed by without seeing him. To them, he was invisible. To Marcus, every night was another test of survival. But that night, hunger clawed at his stomach like never before. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He had searched trash bins, hoping for scraps, but found nothing but empty wrappers. His body trembled from weakness, his breath fogging in the cold. And as he walked past one restaurant after another, the smells tortured him. Fried chicken, garlic butter, steaks seared to perfection. It was as though the entire city was mocking his hunger. At last, Marcus stopped outside a restaurant that looked grander than most. Its tall windows revealed tables covered in crisp white cloths, polished glasses, and candlelight. The laughter inside carried an almost musical quality. Through the glass, Marcus could see families, couples, and groups of friends enjoying steaming plates of food. His chest tightened as he pressed a hand to his stomach. The restaurant was called La Belle Maison, a place of elegance, where the wealthy often dined. Its owner, Charles Whitman, was a white man in his late 50s, tall and lean with silver hair combed neatly to the side. His blue eyes were sharp, often narrowed in suspicion. Charles wore a suit even while managing his restaurant, his tie always perfect, his shoes always shining. To him, reputation meant everything. His restaurant was not just a place to eat. It was his pride, his symbol of success. Marcus hesitated at the door. He knew the rules of places like this. Men like him were not welcome, but desperation pushed him forward. He needed food, even just bread, even just water. Summoning the last of his courage, Marcus opened the door and stepped inside. The warmth of the restaurant wrapped around him instantly. The sounds of clinking silverware, faint jazz music, and chatter seemed to quiet the moment he entered. Heads turned. Eyes lingered. Conversations faltered. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, aware of the stares, aware of how out of place he looked. His hoodie was stained, his shoes were worn, his face unshaven. Against the polished marble floors and glittering chandeliers, he was a shadow out of place. Charles, standing behind the counter near the bar, noticed him immediately. His lips curled in disdain as he stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said sharply, his voice carrying across the room. "Can I help you?" Marcus lowered his head slightly, his voice rough but steady. I was wondering if I could get something to eat. I don't have much. Maybe just a little bread." A soft murmur ran through the restaurant. Some diners looked away uncomfortably. Others watched with curiosity, their eyes darting between Marcus and the owner. Charles chuckled, but it was not the kind of laugh that warmed the air. It was cold, dismissive. "This isn't a soup kitchen," he said. "We serve paying customers here. If you can't afford it, you don't belong here." The words stung, but Marcus stood still, refusing to move. Hunger and pride warred inside him, but hunger won. "Please," he whispered. "Anything. Just something small." Charles's laughter grew louder, echoing across the room. "You've got some nerve walking in here like that. Look at you." He gestured to Marcus's clothes. "This is a fine dining establishment, not a charity hall." A few diners chuckled nervously, unsure if they should join in the ridicule or remain silent. Marcus's chest tightened, but he kept his gaze steady. He had been laughed at before. He had been rejected before. But this time, something inside him stirred. Charles leaned closer, his voice dropping low. "I think you should leave before you embarrass yourself further." Marcus was about to turn, his pride cracking under the weight of humiliation, when something slipped from his hoodie. A thin chain around his neck, hidden beneath the fabric, fell into view. The necklace was simple but carried a small pendant, a golden emblem. worn but unmistakable. It caught the light, shimmering faintly. A gasp rose from one of the tables. A woman whispered to her husband, her eyes wide. Another diner leaned forward, recognizing the pendant immediately. Charles noticed too. His laughter faded, replaced by something else, something sharp, almost fearful. His eyes locked on the necklace, and his breath caught. Marcus, realizing what had happened, quickly tucked it back beneath his hoodie. But it was too late. The room had changed. The stares were no longer of mockery, but of curiosity, and something more. The necklace was not just jewelry. It was a symbol, a mark of something powerful, something connected to a past Marcus had tried to bury. Charles straightened, his arrogance wavering for the first time that night. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice tight. Marcus's gaze hardened. "That's not your concern," he said quietly. But for Charles, it was very much a concern, because he knew that emblem. And if Marcus truly had the right to wear it, then this homeless man was not just a drifter off the street. He was someone far more important than anyone in the room could have imagined. The room held its breath, waiting. And Marcus, standing tall despite his ragged clothes, felt the tide shifting. For the first time in years, the world seemed to see him, not as a homeless man, not as a beggar, but as someone who carried a story worth knowing. This was only the beginning. The diner stayed restless after the man left. The waitress, whose name tag read Sophie, kept glancing toward the door, her lips pressed tight. She had been the only one who tried to help him, sliding that glass of water across the counter when everyone else sat silent. But in the back, the owner, Gerald, was laughing. His broad shoulders shook as he retold the scene to two regulars. "Did you see the look on his face when I told him we don't serve his kind? Like I'd let some bum sit here, scare away paying customers." The men chuckled nervously, not sure whether to fully join in. Gerald didn't care, he never had. His diner wasn't about kindness. It was about control. His father had run it the same way, and he prided himself on never bowing to pity. Yet Sophie couldn't shake the image of the homeless man's necklace. For the briefest second, when his shirt collar slipped, the chain had caught the light. A small medallion, worn but intact, glimmered on his chest. She had seen a symbol like that before, etched into old photographs and history books. It wasn't costume jewelry. It was something real. "Break's over, Sophie," Gerald barked. "Quit staring at the door. He's gone." She nodded, forced her hands to busy themselves with plates. But her mind kept returning to the man's eyes. They weren't dull like most who came begging. They carried weight, grief, wisdom, and something else she couldn't name. Meanwhile, outside, Marcus shuffled down the sidewalk. The necklace pressed against his chest beneath the thin fabric of his shirt. He gripped it lightly through the cloth. It wasn't just jewelry. It was memory. Years ago, he had been someone else. A father, a husband, a man with a home, a career, and dreams. Life hadn't always been sidewalks and cold benches. But fate had been unkind. A factory accident had claimed his job. Bills piled high, then debt collectors. His wife grew sick, and the medical costs crushed them. He pawned everything, except the necklace. The necklace had been his grandfather's, passed down through generations. It bore the insignia of the 761st Tank Battalion, the famed all-black unit that fought in World War II. His grandfather had worn it through Europe, through mud and fire, through the weight of a world that doubted his worth. Marcus's father had carried it after him, a reminder of strength and pride. Now Marcus wore it, the last possession that tied him to a lineage of fighters. He tightened his grip on it as his stomach growled. Hunger gnawed at him, but so did shame. He hated begging, hated being seen as nothing more than a body on the street. But that day, something deep inside told him not to give up. Back in the diner, a wealthy man entered, a corporate figure in a crisp suit, briefcase in hand. The air shifted as Gerald rushed to greet him with a wide grin. Money always bought respect here. The businessman ordered coffee, glanced at the menu, then paused. "Say," he murmured, "I passed a fellow outside homeless, wearing an old military necklace. Looked like something important." Gerald's smile faltered. Sophie froze in place, ears straining. The businessman continued. "If you see him again, you might want to know, collectors pay thousands for genuine World War II memorabilia, especially anything tied to the 761st. The diner went silent. Gerald's eyes narrowed. Sophie's heart thudded. Outside, Marcus sat on the curb, unaware that whispers about his necklace had already begun. That night, as neon lights flickered on, Sophie stepped out with a bag of leftovers hidden in her purse. She spotted Marcus under a street lamp, his shoulders hunched. She approached slowly. "Hey," she whispered. "You shouldn't be out here hungry. Here." She offered the bag. Marcus looked up, startled, then softened. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." He accepted it, hands trembling. As he opened the bag, the chain slipped into view again, glinting under the lamp. Sophie's breath caught. "Sir, that necklace. Where did you get it?" Marcus's eyes darkened. "It was my grandfather's. He was a hero. They called them the Black Panthers, black soldiers who fought while their country still treated them as less than men." Sophie swallowed hard. "I know. I studied them in school. My great-uncle was in the war too, but he never talked about it." For a moment, the world stilled. Just a waitress and a homeless man, bound by invisible threads of history. But in the shadows across the street, Gerald watched. His eyes were fixed not on Marcus, but on the necklace. The next day, the diner buzzed again. Gerald moved differently now, less dismissive, more calculating. He wanted that chain. Not because of respect, not because of honor, because greed had carved his soul into sharp edges. When Marcus stepped in again, this time more cautiously, stomach empty, dignity thin, Gerald forced a smile. "Hey, friend. Sorry about yesterday. Why don't you sit down? Breakfast's on me." The regulars blinked. Sophie's head snapped up. She knew Gerald too well. He never gave anything away without reason. Marcus hesitated, then slowly slid into a booth. Hunger outweighed pride this time. He placed a hand over the necklace, tucking it deeper into his shirt. Gerald leaned on the counter, eyes gleaming. "So, that's a fine necklace you've got there. Mind if I take a look?" The room stiffened. Marcus's jaw clenched. He shook his head. "It's not for sale." Gerald's smile faded. But beneath it, calculation churned. Night fell heavy again. Marcus lay beneath a bridge, turning the medallion in his fingers. He whispered to the memory of his grandfather. "What am I supposed to do? They see me as nothing. But this is all I have left." He didn't know that the coming days would bring everything to light. The truth of his past, the cruelty of greed, and the moment when laughter inside a diner would turn into silence. Because soon, everyone would see that necklace. And when they did, the man they once dismissed as just a homeless black man would become someone they could never ignore. The moment was frozen in time. Darnell stood there with the weight of his past pressing against his chest, and the shiny necklace catching the dim restaurant lights as if it were holding a secret the world wasn't ready to hear. The laughter that had filled the restaurant earlier had died down into whispers. The servers huddled near the kitchen door, their curiosity written across their faces. A few of the patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What once had been a spectacle, a homeless man daring to step foot into this polished establishment, was now something else entirely. Because the necklace wasn't just a necklace. It was a story, and stories, as we know, have a way of piercing through arrogance and breaking down walls far stronger than steel. The owner, Richard, found himself unable to move his eyes away from it. He had mocked Darnell moments earlier, had laughed with that smug superiority of a man who thought wealth made him untouchable. But now, as that small piece of jewelry glimmered, Richard's throat went dry. "Where did you get that?" Richard's voice was quieter now, stripped of its bravado. Darnell raised his head slowly, his eyes tired but unyielding. "This belonged to my father," he said. His voice cracked but carried strength. "He wore it every day of his life until the day he died. He gave it to me when I was a boy. He told me, no matter how hard life gets, no matter how much the world looks down on you, this necklace is a reminder of who you are." The room was silent. For the first time that night, people weren't staring at a homeless man. They were looking at a son carrying the weight of his father's legacy. Richard blinked, trying to mask his sudden unease. "And who exactly was your father?" he asked, though deep inside, he already feared the answer. Darnell straightened his posture, his hand clutching the necklace, as if it were his lifeline. "My father was Samuel Wright." The name hung heavy in the air. A woman gasped softly. An older man sitting near the back of the restaurant froze, his fork clattering onto his plate. Richard's own face paled. He knew that name. He had heard it whispered in boardrooms, honored in ceremonies, etched in the pages of history. Samuel Wright was not just a man. He was a legend, a decorated veteran, a civil rights leader, a man who had once stood on podiums, preaching unity, justice, and equality. His words had inspired thousands, and his actions had saved lives. He had been invited to the White House, photographed shaking hands with presidents, honored with medals that few in the country could ever hope to earn. And now his son, the son of Samuel Wright, was standing in front of them, dressed in rags, hungry, mocked, and dismissed. The whispers grew louder. "No, that can't be. Samuel Wright's son? Is that true?" Darnell didn't flinch. He nodded. "Yes, that's who I am." Richard felt his stomach twist into knots. All his arrogance, all his laughter, all his superiority melted away into shame. He had turned away a man whose father had fought for the very rights that allowed Richard to own his business, to prosper, to live without fear. But worse, it wasn't just about Samuel Wright. It was about Darnell. Because behind every great man was a child, a family, a legacy that bore the burden of expectation. And here was that child, still standing, still breathing, even after life had dragged him into the shadows. I didn't know," Richard stammered. His voice cracked. His hands trembled. "If I had known—" Darnell cut him off. His voice rose, not in anger, but in truth. "If you had known, would that have made me more human to you? Would that have made me worthy of food, of respect, of dignity? Do I need to be the son of a hero for you to see me as a man?" The words echoed. Every person in the restaurant lowered their gaze. They felt the sting, not because Darnell shouted, but because he had spoken the undeniable truth. A truth that weighed heavier than gold. Richard opened his mouth but found no words. His lips quivered, his pride shattered. Darnell stepped forward, his hand still on the necklace. "You look at me and see a homeless man. You laugh. You mock. But this necklace, it isn't about wealth. It isn't about power. It's about history. It's about sacrifice. And whether you give me food or not, that truth will never change." The silence was suffocating. Then, from the back of the room, the older man who had dropped his fork slowly stood up. His hands shook, his eyes moist. "I knew your father," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He saved my brother's life during the war. Samuel Wright was a hero, and so are you, son, for surviving what you've been through." The words pierced through the silence like a light breaking the darkest night. Darnell's eyes filled with tears. He hadn't expected kindness. Not here. Not now. But sometimes, when the world least expects it, truth has a way of forcing people to see what they've been blind to. Richard looked around, his face flushed with shame. He wanted to run, to escape the judgment in the room, but there was nowhere to hide. The restaurant that had once been his domain now felt like a courtroom, and he was the man on trial. And Darnell? For the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one being judged. He was the one holding others accountable. And that shift changed everything. The city slept, but within the small restaurant, something had awakened. Conversations shifted, whispers carried, and hearts, once hardened by indifference, began to soften in ways they never had before. Darnell sat at the corner booth, the warm glow of the pendant necklace still pressed against his chest. For years it had been a weight, not because of its material value, but because of what it represented. A reminder of who he once was, of who his family believed he still could be. But now, under the scrutiny of strangers, it was no longer just his reminder. It had become a mirror, reflecting everyone's humanity, or lack thereof. The restaurant owner, Gregory, could hardly believe how quickly the tables had turned. Just hours ago, he laughed with his staff at the sight of a ragged man walking in. Now, he was pacing in his own kitchen, restless, struggling with thoughts he had long buried. "Why does this bother me so much?" he muttered under his breath. "It's just a man with a necklace, isn't it?" But deep down, Gregory knew it wasn't just a man. It was the look in Darnell's eyes. Eyes that carried both pride and pain. Eyes that spoke of battles fought silently, losses endured, and dignity fiercely clung to, even when life stripped him of everything else. Gregory's own reflection in the stainless steel fridge door seemed to mock him. He had worked his whole life to be respected. He had built this restaurant brick by brick, sacrificing everything. And yet here he was, the owner, embarrassed not by what the homeless man had done, but by how he had behaved. Still, pride is a stubborn beast. He would not go out there and admit he was wrong. Not yet. Meanwhile, the waitress, Emily, stood near the counter, her heart torn. She had always considered herself kind, always tried to see the good in people. But tonight tested her. She remembered the way Gregory laughed, the way she almost laughed too, just to keep in step with the man who signed her paychecks. But when she saw Darnell's necklace, something clicked. Her grandmother used to say, "Never measure a man by the dust on his shoes, but by the light in his eyes." And tonight she saw a light in Darnell's eyes, dimmed but unbroken. She couldn't stop herself. She approached his booth with a fresh cup of coffee, setting it down gently. Darnell looked up, startled. "I didn't order this." "I know," Emily whispered. "It's on me." His lips parted as though to argue, but he stopped himself. For the first time in months, maybe years, someone was offering without expecting something back. He cupped the mug with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into his fingertips, thawing the cold that had long settled into his bones. In the far corner, a couple who had been dining quietly began whispering too. "Did you see that necklace?" the woman asked her husband. "Yes," he replied softly. "I know that emblem. That's from Morehouse College. My brother had one just like it." The woman gasped. "Morehouse? That means he was educated, respected. He wasn't always." The man trailed off, not wanting to say the word homeless. But the truth was undeniable. Darnell wasn't just a man off the street. He was someone who had once walked a very different path. As more eyes fell upon him, Darnell shifted uncomfortably. He never asked for attention. In fact, he avoided it. Yet here it was, creeping toward him like a shadow he couldn't escape. He wanted to disappear. But at the same time, another part of him, the part that remembered who he once was, sat up straighter. His shoulders lifted, his voice steadied, and his presence filled the small space. For the first time in years, people weren't looking through him. They were looking at him. Gregory finally emerged from the kitchen, holding a tray of bread rolls. It was an awkward attempt at reconciliation, though he would never admit it outright. He approached Darnell's booth, cleared his throat, and set the basket down. "Fresh from the oven," Gregory muttered, not meeting Darnell's eyes. Darnell studied him, sensing the unease beneath the man's carefully guarded exterior. He knew this wasn't about bread. It was about guilt, about shame. "Thank you," Darnell said quietly. Not for the bread, but for the small, stumbling step toward decency. Gregory nodded stiffly, then turned to leave. But before he could walk away, Darnell spoke again. "Do you know what this necklace means?" Gregory froze. Slowly, he turned back. I figured it was expensive." Darnell shook his head. "No, it's not about the price. It's about the journey. This was given to me when I graduated. I was the first in my family to walk across that stage. My mother cried that day. My father, God rest his soul, he said I carried our family name to heights they never dreamed of." The room fell silent. Even the clinking of silverware paused. Every ear leaned in. "But life doesn't always go the way we plan," Darnell continued, his voice steady but heavy. "Bad choices, bad luck, and suddenly, the man with the degree becomes the man with nowhere to sleep. And yet," he tapped the pendant with his fingers, "I wear this to remind myself that who I was still matters. That I am more than what you see." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. The couple in the corner exchanged glances, their own prejudices unraveling in real time. And Gregory? His throat tightened. For the first time in a long time, he felt small. Smaller than the man he had mocked. Because standing before him, despite ragged clothes and worn-out shoes, was dignity. And dignity was something no one could strip away. And just like that, the story had shifted. No longer was it about a homeless man being laughed at in a restaurant. It was about truth, about resilience, about the necklace that carried more weight than gold ever could. But none of them, not Gregory, not Emily, not the curious diners, knew that what Darnell was about to reveal next would shake them to their very core. The next morning, Marcus woke before the first light touched the city. He was still lying on the small cot Thomas had given him in the storage room of the restaurant. The air smelled faintly of yeast and spices drifting from the kitchen. For the first time in years, Marcus had woken up in a bed, beneath a roof that didn't belong to a shelter, a bus stop, or an abandoned warehouse. It felt strange. He stretched slowly, his eyes catching the faint gleam of the necklace hanging by the chair. He picked it up and let it dangle in his hand, the cross swaying gently. He rubbed it between his thumb and finger. His mother's voice echoed in his head, her lullabies, her prayers, her laugh. He had carried it for years, never letting go, never pawning it even when he had gone nights without food. It wasn't just metal. It was his lifeline, his identity, his last connection to the person who once believed in him. When he stepped out into the main room, Thomas was already there, wiping down tables with quiet care. The older man looked up, surprised to see Marcus so early. "You're up," Thomas said. "Couldn't sleep much," Marcus admitted. "Too used to being outside." Thomas chuckled softly. "Give it time. A warm bed takes a while to trust when you've lived in the cold. He set down the rag and looked at Marcus carefully. That necklace, there's more to it, isn't there? Marcus hesitated. He felt a knot tighten in his chest. For years, he had kept the truth hidden, buried under layers of shame, guilt, and fear. But Thomas's steady eyes held no judgment, only curiosity and something Marcus hadn't felt from a stranger in years, compassion. My mother gave it to me, Marcus said slowly. She worked 3 jobs, barely slept, but she always made sure we had food. When I was a kid, I thought she was invincible. But then she got sick cancer. We couldn't afford the treatments. I watched her fade, and before she passed, she pressed this into my hand. His voice trembled. She told me it wasn't just a necklace, it was a reminder, a promise that I'd never be alone, that God would watch me, even when no one else did. Thomas leaned against the table, arms folded, his face serious. And you carried that through everything? Through the streets, through the hunger, through the nights when no one cared. Marcus nodded. It's the only thing I didn't lose. Not to the streets, not to the gangs, not to the bottle. I lost myself plenty of times, but this? I couldn't let go. It's the only thing that made me feel like I still mattered. For a long time, Thomas was quiet. Then he said, Marcus, do you know why I reacted the way I did when I saw that necklace yesterday? Marcus frowned. I figured you were just shocked to see me wearing something valuable. Thomas shook his head. No, my father wore the same one. Marcus froze. His eyes widened as he stared at Thomas. What do you mean? Thomas reached beneath his shirt and pulled out a chain. Hanging from it was a cross almost identical to Marcus's. The same style, the same engravings, weathered with age but unmistakable. Marcus's heart raced. He clutched his necklace as if afraid it might vanish. How do you have that? My father was a preacher, Thomas said softly. He had one just like it. He said it was a symbol passed through generations of men in our family. A reminder of strength, faith, and dignity. He paused. When he died, he left it to me. Marcus stared at him, trembling. His mind was spinning, fragments of memory flashing. His mother's words, her quiet mentions of a father he never knew, a man who had walked out before Marcus could even remember his face. No, Marcus whispered. It can't be. Thomas stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Marcus's. What was your mother's name? Elaine, Marcus said. His voice cracked. Elaine Brooks. Thomas's breath caught. He dropped into the nearest chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His eyes glistened with sudden tears. My God, he whispered. Elaine Brooks. I knew her. She was my first love. I didn't know she had a son. The room fell silent, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Marcus felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. You, Marcus's voice shook. You're telling me you're my father? Thomas's eyes brimmed with regret. I never knew. Elaine never told me. We were young, foolish. I made mistakes. But if you're her son, if you're holding that necklace, his voice broke. Then yes. Marcus, I'm your father. The words crashed over Marcus like a tidal wave. He stumbled back, gripping the necklace so tightly it cut into his palm. His entire life, the abandonment, the struggle, the hunger, the anger, suddenly had a face. A name. The man standing in front of him. You left us, Marcus said, his voice raw with hurt. She raised me alone. She died alone. And he shook his head. I suffered because you weren't there. Tears streamed down Thomas's face. I didn't know, Marcus. If I had God, if I had known, I never would have left. I would have been there for you. For her. For everything. The pain in Marcus's chest felt unbearable, but beneath it was something else. Confusion, disbelief, and the faintest flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The necklace dangled between them, 2 matching crosses catching the morning light. In that moment, Marcus realized the truth. The necklace had always been more than a trinket. It had been a thread, a connection he hadn't understood. And now, standing before him, that thread had led him to something he never expected. Family. And maybe, just maybe, a chance at redemption for both of them.